and we have a motion in relation to the Minister's comments, but I think we wanted to start first to hear from Richard about some items that you want to draw to our attention at the outset. Is that right?
Yes, correct, Madam Mayor. There is no Minister's comment directly in relation to the specific purpose Littleton Port Zone, but there were comments made in the covering letter by the Minister on this matter. A memo from Richard Osborne and Debbie Hogan was included in attachment 3 to the report, which explained this matter. So perhaps we could do that first before we actually get into the Minister's comments table.
All right. So, do you want to speak to the memo? So it's on page 269 of your agenda.
Yes, that's correct.
So through you, Madam Chair, as the councillors will be aware, last year the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery directed that a recovery plan be prepared for Littleton Port, and that has been going through its processes of recent times. Basically, LPC did a lot of work, provided that to ECAN. ECAN then have further refined that and have recently put it out for consultation. What that includes is basically the direction for Littleton Port looking forward quite some time into the future, and it also includes draft changes to a raft of statutory documents, including the RPS, basically the coastal plan, as well as other regional documents. But of note to the councillors, it also includes draft amendments to the land use provisions as well. Now, as the councillors would be aware, one of the chapters that we put up to the ministers for comment was the draft special purpose Littleton Port Zone. So what we've been doing over the previous few months is working closely with ECAN on what those provisions would look like. And it had originally been our intent that we would notify those through the replacement district plan process. However, ECAN have pursued notifying those for consultation through the Littleton Port Recovery Plan process. And the memo before you really outlines, I guess, the pros and cons of which process you'd choose. And our recommendation to the councillors is that those land use, on balance, those land use provisions are probably best addressed through that Littleton Port Recovery Plan process, as opposed to the duplication that would occur if we were to also proceed with notification of those through the replacement district plan process. So the memo, which is contained within the overall report to you on page 2, it considers a couple of options. Option A, which is proceed with notification of the special purpose Littleton Port Zone, and option B is the opposite of that, not proceed with notification of the special purpose Littleton Port Zone. And essentially our conclusion is that, and our recommendation to you is that option B is the best option. And there's a raft of reasons for that, not the least being the duplication of process, the confusion that it may cause to the Littleton community having to submit on two different sets of what are ostensibly the same set of provisions, and the cost associated with pursuing those through different processes. And I guess at the end of the day, to put it bluntly, the recovery plan has precedence over the replacement district plan. So regardless of what happened, if we were to proceed with notification of the land use provisions through the replacement district plan, at the end of the day, the Minister will sign off a recovery plan and that will be final. And if there is some difference in terms of the provisions, the recovery plan in essence trumps the replacement district plan. So our recommendation to you is that you proceed with option B, and that is that we not proceed with notification of the land use provisions, and for the reasons outlined in the memo.
So that's recommendation 6.6 in front of us. Would it be helpful if we just move that as a separate resolution now and
Yes.
address that first up? So I'll move 6.6. And Paul Lonsdale will second. It's all right, we'll have questions and comments in a minute. I just want to I just want to get that. Yeah. And we're noting in that submissions may be required to be made and they would be approved through a DPR subcommittee meeting.
Yes.
Yep. All right, so questions? Yes, yeah, Yanni?
Can you just clarify for me where the current council resolution is at? Because I thought we'd already made a council resolution on this.
So the matter came to the subcommittee of council recently, and essentially that decision was to either to write to the minister and seek that he direct us to not proceed with notification through the replacement district plan, or to, and in the end the committee resolved to not write to the minister. So, but regardless of that, we received comment back from the minister, so we didn't end up writing to the minister seeking that direction from him, but we got that direction regardless in the covering letter back to us. And,
Well, it's not a direction, it's a suggestion of process, you know. So they're actually, the ministers aren't in fact directing us in this matter, but they've recommended a way forward, which is a practical solution to the situation that we're in with a dual process potentially in place. And we would stop a dual process from occurring by accepting the staff recommendation today. So,
My recollection is we've had this debate, we've made a decision. I think we probably did that in a briefing rather than a formal committee, or it may have been in PX.
well, this is when we make the decision.
I'm not sure it is. So do we have minutes of that meeting that I can refer to and see what we've actually decided? Because clearly the hearing, and the other question I have is
So
how
the
does...
DPR subcommittee is not making decisions on they have not made a decision about not notifying.
I thought this
They
went to
didn't
council.
write to the minister, as I understand it. We've just heard advice on that matter.
My understanding, and Richard can correct me if I'm wrong, is that following that DPR subcommittee meeting, there's been a note from the minister in relation to this, which Richard refers to, which, okay, may not direct us, but in effect invites us to have the Littleton Port plan in effect trump it, because it does
The
trump.
thing I'm just trying to clarify is there was decisions that were made. So if you look at the memo that we've got, and you look at the benefit option A and option B, there is a whole bunch of other information about who's the decision maker, what the scope of the Littleton Port recovery plan is, etc., that we considered through and came up with a recommendation or a resolution. So I was just trying to understand what formally we've already agreed to as a council, because this seems quite different advice than what we previously have had, and what the intention of
Sorry,
us has been.
well, can we get an answer to that question? What was the previous decision? Was there a decision taken by the District Plan Review Subcommittee that is binding on us now?
The Littleton Port Working Group agreed that having a single process is going to be far more preferable, because if they end up with a different decision at the end of it, it embarrasses everyone.
That's the debate.
The previous decision of the subcommittee was to either write to the minister or not write to the minister. The council decided to not write to the minister, requesting to get direction from them. However, regardless, we got a suggestion, which we've outlined in the covering report to the councillors. Now, the decision of council today is whether to proceed with notification of the land use provisions through the replacement district plan, or not proceed with notification of the land use provisions.
Yeah, this was always going to be a public discussion. So the decision wasn't previously taken in terms of what would be done. This was, I think, the decision was taken that the matter was not going to be included in the letter to the ministers when we referred the chapters, ostensibly on the basis that it would be a matter that we would decide ourselves. I presume that's what happened, because I wasn't actually at the meeting concerned, and now the decision has come to us appropriately at the right time in the process. And what we're being asked to do is to make the decision as to whether we notify or don't notify. And I'm very much in favour of not notifying. Phil?
Well, look, if we're going to have the debate now, certainly, look, I'd support that. I think that there's more information for us now, right in front of us now than when the committee last met. Also, like, we do have this letter from the Minister as well, and I've got no doubt that the benefits that are outlined in terms of option B would far outweigh the advantages, for example, in option A.
Yeah, Pauline.
As I recall last time, the question, one of the questions was, should it be our decision to allocate this to the Littleton Port Recovery Plan from ECAN or not? And I think that was the big concern, that it should actually not be us that do that, and that we were going to request a direction from the Minister. So the question is whether this suggestion is strong enough for us to follow. And the second was a concern that Andrew Turner spoke at length on this, that the people, the local people over there may not have enough input by way of the ECAN plan as opposed to our district plan. That was a big concern that he spoke of. So it's a question for us of whether we believe that this suggestion from the Minister is strong enough for us to pick up and say, all right, we will make this decision, because it does become our decision, which is what we didn't want. We wanted it to be a directive, because people may feel unheard. I just thought
I think, if I may, Madam Chair, that the preliminary draft Littleton Port Recovery Plan is currently open for submissions. It is going to a hearing. Just been handed the dates. It was submissions open on 13th of April. They closed 11th of May. Hearing begins on the 2nd of June. It's chaired by a panel. Sir Graham Pankhurst is the chair of that panel. So it's a pretty, for want of a better description, grunty panel, and there will be due consideration in that. One of the things that we're progressing at the moment, and is the possibility of a council submission on that, and we've got a briefing to you next Monday, and there's been a memo go around to the Littleton Port Working Party on it, and the direction that ECAN are seeking is that we don't just submit, but we actually provide our evidence to them as part of that submission as well. So it will be a pretty formal process. We will have an opportunity to be heard should council choose to submit on it. And from a staff perspective, our recommendation is that we take that opportunity and put our best foot forward as part of that hearing process. And that's the appropriate forum for us to do that. If we were to proceed simply through notification of these land use provisions through our own plan, it would simply, in terms of all those cons that we've got in the memo to you, there would be dual processes, there would be potential confusion, there would be double up on staff time, there would be additional costs, and at the end of the day, the Littleton Port Recovery Plan will be the decisive factor.
Yep. So, is there any debate about that, Yanni?
I personally won't support this. I feel really uncomfortable that the councillor who represents that ward was involved in the previous decision. Unfortunately, he's not here at the moment. Is it a housing thing? I'd really like to hear from him, because my recollection was we've had this debate, we've had this discussion, we weighed up the different options, and we felt as a collective that it was best to go through notifying it as part of our district plan, because it's actually a more transparent decision-making process than a recovery plan. It actually takes it away from the minister making the final decision and puts it to that independent hearings panel. And we actually thought that there was equally as much confusion as going through only one process for a recovery plan than actually going through the two different processes. That is because the port recovery plan is limited to port recovery, and the district plan is around wider land use in Littleton. So it seems to me we're actually talking about two different things, and putting them into one process that's a recovery plan, when in fact some of the potential is a lot more than just a recovery plan. It's really talking about fundamentally changing the land use pattern in Littleton, I think is something that should be going through the district plan review. So I don't know whether it's possible to leave this item on the table until we hear from the local councillor. I know the local community board had a view, and until I hear more from them, I'm not prepared to support this. I don't actually think it's the right way to go. I know the minister has a view, but I think this is our district plan and we need to stand firm.
Yeah. Phil?
Councillor Turner's just arrived, so he can speak for what I had discussed with him.
Glenn.
Thank you. For me, what's important is the context that lay behind that decision of that subcommittee or that recommendation to not write to the minister, and that was simply that we supported that principle of notification. The way this process now is kind of stacked up, it suggests it would take us down an inefficient path by way of a dual process, but in principle I still support that most basic principle here of notification. So I'm with Councillor Johansson on this.
Andrew.
When we've previously discussed this, had been in favour of us continuing to pursue this chapter ourselves and continue to develop in the way that we'd originally intended. Clearly there are some efficiencies and practicalities to allowing the port recovery plan process to run its course in place of our chapter. I was always keen that if there was a suggestion that that was the way it should be done, it should come through the port recovery plan process rather than council requesting that we change our process. And we're now in a different space than we were at the time that we had that conversation. So for all it's a difference to the view that I'd put forward previously, I'm now supportive of the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'd like to agree with Andrew. I think that I wasn't at the earlier discussion, but we've had a fairly clear statement from two ministers. I think councillors can feel comfortable with the advice that they've given, even though they weren't asked to provide it. They have said it would be helpful to avoid duplication. I've got every confidence in Sir Graham Pankhurst operating a process, and instead of inviting people to speak to Sir Graham Pankhurst's committee and then to speak to Sir John Hanson's committee, I think it's actually better that they direct their attention and work to that Littleton recovery planning process. It's not an ideal situation, but the truth is that Littleton Port is more than the port. It is the land around it and the communities engaged with it. So, and I've got enormous confidence in the committee that Andrew's leading in that regard for us as a council. So, I'm very supportive of the staff recommendation. So I will put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. So who's voting no? Can you just put up your hand? Yanni, Pauline and Glenn.
The minutes are here, but they haven't been confirmed because we haven't had another DPR meeting since that meeting.
Yep.
Well, yes.
Yeah. All right. So, so that one's now dealt with. That's carried.